Today, we have something a little bit different because we have a football boot from a brand that we have never talked about before. These are the new Kipsta Jaguars, and despite being a top-end model, they retail for less than $90. So in this video, we're gonna cover all the features of these boots to help you decide if they might be a good option for you. And we'll also discuss how they compare to other popular boots that are in the same category. And after watching the video, if you're interested in picking up these or any of the other boots that we discuss, I'll leave links to them on sale in the description below. So to kick things off, let's do an overview of the design of these boots. So the Kipsta Jaguars actually come from a French sporting good company called Decathlon that's been around for about 50 years. Now Decathlon actually sells a lot of different things outside of just football related products, but Kipsta is pretty much their main line dedicated to this sport. And Kipsta may actually be most known for creating footballs themselves, as they are the main provider of balls for League One as well as the Conference League, and I think the Europa League as well. And while Kipsta has been making football boots for a few years now, they're clearly trying to expand their reach, and that's exactly what their goal is with the new Jaguar. And my first thought when I got these boots out of the box is that they definitely do have a bit of a familiar look to them, especially if you're familiar with one-piece knit upper football boots that have this high-cut collar. They especially started to remind me of the Puma Futures. And this colorway in particular has this cheetah print that I think is going to be a little bit love it or hate it. I think for some people it's going to be kind of on the flashy side, but that being said, if you go on their website, you can find some alternative colorways. I think they also have it in a white and neon yellow version as well as a black version. So if you want something a little bit more subtle, you are going to have that option. Now there are some key differences between the Jaguar and a full knit upper boot like the Puma Future. Starting off, the upper on the Jaguars is actually going to have this kind of plastic-like coating that wraps all the way around it, almost like a protective layer. It's not too sticky and kind of has a slick laminated feel to it. But then running through the center of the boots, you are going to have that really stretchy knit material that you should be pretty familiar with other football boots from Nike, New Balance, and Puma. The upper itself is going to be really thin, so it's definitely going to deliver that pretty barefoot feel on the ball. And then inside of the heel area, you are going to have a really soft, thick, pillowy heel liner. In a size 10.5 US, they come in at about 212 grams, and honestly, anything give or take within 10 grams of that 200 gram mark is going to mean that they're pretty much on par with some of the lightest boots you can get. So I'm talking about the Vapor 16 from Nike, as well as the F50 from Adidas, and the New Balance Furon V7. It's pretty much in that range. Now flipping over to the underside of the boots, this is where I think things tend to get a little bit more interesting. Now this sole plate is composed of what is called a Pebax material, which is basically just a scientific trademark name for a specific kind of polymer. It's a pretty common material used in the sole plates of some different shoes, but this is my first time seeing it used in a mass market football boot. And overall, I'm actually really impressed with how this sole plate feels. I mean, when you look at it here, it's extremely thin, which overall contributes to how lightweight these boots are, but it also has this really nice flex down the midfoot, which I really appreciate because in my opinion, some football boots just have way too rigid of a flex, especially throughout the midfoot. Just for the sake of comparison, these are a pair of the Nike Phantom GX2 Pros, and these, I mean, I can just barely bend them if I try really hard throughout the midfoot, whereas with the Jaguars here, I mean, it takes almost no force whatsoever, and they do actually bend at what I think is a really natural position here. This is essentially exactly how your foot bends when it pronates if you're sprinting or just running. So when it comes to the flex of the sole plate, they definitely get bonus points on my end. And then the stud configuration itself isn't anything too crazy. You're pretty much just gonna have these 7 diamond-like shaped studs in the forefoot. They are advertised for use on firm ground natural grass, but I did use these on artificial grass, and honestly, I didn't notice too much of an issue. The traction was really solid and they didn't feel overly aggressive. Next up, let's get into how these boots fit and feel on feet. So unsurprisingly, when I first got these on, they did remind me of other high-cut knit upper football boots that I've tried on in the past. So I'm talking about boots like the Nike Superfly, the Puma Future, as well as the new Tequila from New Balance. Now, as soon as I got these on feet, there were just a few mixed feelings I had about the fit. And the main annoying thing I noticed was just this knit material that runs through the center. It seems like there just may be a slight excess of material that's used across the midfoot because it does bunch up quite a bit as you get the laces tight. But to be fair, it's a little bit more annoying on the aesthetic side of things rather than the actual fit because I don't actually notice any discomfort across the top of my foot. I just think it looks a lot better when you don't have any bunching on this knitted material. But other than that, that was pretty much the only con in terms of the fit of these boots. I got these shipped in actually my European size, which is a 44 EU, and I found that the length was perfect, so I would definitely recommend going true to size. And then the width of these, especially in the toe box area, I also thought was a bit better than other competitors. So I thought on average these were wider than boots from Nike, Adidas, and Puma, maybe not quite as wide as some competitors from New Balance. But I myself do have pretty wide feet, and I didn't notice any discomfort or irritation on my big toe or little toe at the front of these boots. So regardless of your exact foot shape, I feel I can pretty comfortably recommend these. Now the knit material itself that runs through the center of the boot and around the collar, it is super soft and really stretchy. That being said, the only thing I could say about the material itself is that it could be maybe a little bit tighter just so that it hugs your ankle a bit closer. I did notice when I got these boots on and laced up pretty tight, there were a few gaps around my ankle. But when I contextualize that around the fact that these boots are only, I think, 70 euros or around $90 US, it really isn't that surprising that the knit material isn't quite as premium as what you would find on a $250 or $260 pair of boots. Other than that, the heel area is super deep, well secured, and very nicely padded around the back of the heel, so I didn't notice any irritation, and I felt that my foot was really well locked in place. And that can sometimes be an issue, especially with more affordable boots, especially more affordable boots that have this knitted upper design. Sometimes they can just be too loose and your heel is kind of slipping out of the boots. There's really no lockdown whatsoever, but that was just not an issue I experienced with these. Next up, let's talk about what the Jaguars were like to play in. Now, obviously, when it comes to doing these reviews, I think the looks and the price point of these boots are really important, but for me, what it always comes down to is, are the boots actually fun to play in? And for me, playing in these boots and their overall performance is actually where they shine the most. And considering that some of the design elements are a little bit rough around the edges when it comes to these boots, that just made me all the more impressed with how good they were to play in. So as I mentioned, the lockdown was great, so no slipping towards the heel area. And overall, after playing for more than an hour, I just didn't notice any pressure points towards the back of the boot, across the top of the foot, or at the end of the toe box. So the break-in period was pretty much non-existent. Now, another kind of subtle thing I liked about playing in these boots is that if you notice, as I mentioned, the upper here does kind of have this slick, almost laminated coating. I'll be honest, it doesn't feel super premium to the touch, although it is pretty thin and soft. But one thing that laminated coating did do was it kept water out of the boots. And when I was playing at night, the field was just a little bit damp. And in the past, when I've used a boot that had, a full knitted upper, like for example, the Puma Future 7 that came out last year, your feet get wet almost instantly. So it doesn't do a great job of keeping water out. But when I was wearing these, it just kind of had that nice protective barrier, which I really did appreciate. So if you're playing with these in the rain and the field is wet, you're not going to get your boots waterlogged immediately. And while the upper isn't too sticky, it has just enough grip to it to give you a little bit more spin on your shots and your curved long balls. Now the traction on the sole plate, as I already touched on a little bit, it was great. Even though the pitch was a little bit wet, I didn't notice any slipping, and although I was playing on artificial grass, I didn't feel that the stud configuration was too aggressive either. And another thing I really like that you may not actually notice when you're wearing a pair of football boots that has this feature is that flex that you get from the sole plate. Now in my experience, when you wear a pair of boots that has a sole plate that has a crazy rigid flex, so like a 9 or a 10 out of 10, when you can hardly bend it pushing with both hands, overall, I think that those boots tend to fatigue your feet over time because they don't allow your feet to naturally pronate or bend when you're running. So if you ever get that feeling where the balls of your feet actually get really sore after playing in a new pair of boots for 30 minutes or an hour, sometimes the cause of that can be because the sole plate is just too rigid. Whereas with the Jaguars here, you get this really nice flex, and so you're not going to have that issue of your feet feeling fatigued. It's a really simple design characteristic, just having a slightly more flexible sole plate, and I wish it's something that more companies started to implement. So when it comes to performance, these boots can easily compete with not only models at their price range, but also boots that cost $200 to $250. Next up, let's talk about value. So as of right now, the Kipsta Jaguars are going to retail for 70 pounds, which means approximately $90 for those of you that live in the United States. And considering the feature set as well as the comfort and the performance that these boots offer, that price point is pretty impressive. I mean, off the top of my head, the only boot that's this good under that $100 price point, I mean, under that $90 price point really, would probably be the Predator League from Adidas. And as I mentioned earlier, this boot definitely doesn't embarrass itself going up against more expensive flagship models that are just above that $200 price point. And speaking of those other boots, let's talk about the competition to the Kipsta Jaguar. So stylistically, two of the most similar boots I could compare this to would probably be the Puma Future 7 as well as the Nike Superfly 10. Now, starting with the Puma Future 7, I actually love how those boots look. From a pure aesthetic standpoint and overall design, I think the Puma Future 7s might be some of the best looking boots you can get on the market. That's just in my opinion, at least. But when it comes to performance, there was a few things I didn't like about the Puma Futures. I thought the lockdown on those just wasn't quite the best. I thought my heel, even in my standard size, was slipping a little bit out of the back of the boots, and that was even when I had the laces tied pretty tight. So from a pure performance perspective, I would actually slightly prefer the Kipsta Jaguars. Now on the other side of things, the Superfly 10 from Nike, that is gonna have great lockdown and an extremely snug fit. But personally, for my foot shape, since as I mentioned, I do have slightly wider feet, the Superflies as well as the Vapors, they're just gonna be a little bit too narrow for my liking, especially if I'm playing for more than 30 minutes or an hour. So if you do have narrower feet, the Superflies might be a great option for you, but if you have average to slightly wider feet, something like this I think is gonna be more comfortable for you. And finally, the other closest comparison to this kind of design is going to be the New Balance Tekela V4 Plus. And despite the fact that the Tekelas do require maybe just a little bit of break-in time towards the heel area, I do think the Tekelas are going to be better football boots. The V4 Plus just has a more premium design with higher quality materials. But that shouldn't really surprise you because the New Balance Tekela V4 Plus retails for a full price of around $250, meaning it's more than double the price of the full retail of the Kipstas. So if you do have around $200 or so to spare, you may be better off going with the Tekelas, but if you're shopping on a budget under $100, I would definitely take this over any of the takedown versions of the Tekela. All right, so what are my final thoughts on the new Kipsta Jaguar? Well, overall, I'm really glad that I gave these boots a chance. And considering that these are one of the first, I'd say, major releases from Kipsta when it comes to football boots, I was really impressed with how they felt to play in. And if this model is any indication of the trajectory of this brand and the kind of boots they'll be making in the future, I definitely think there's a lot to be excited about. I mean, if they just tidy up a few of the loose edges, maybe make the knitted collar a little bit more premium, a little bit tighter, they'd be dealing with one of the top football boots on the entire market. Now, the availability of these on the market is going to depend on your specific location. If you live in Europe, they probably are going to be easier to get right now. And I think over the next couple months, you should be able to get them if you order online from North America. But under $90 or 70 euros, I just don't think you're going to find many better options than this. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. Please let me know in the comments below if you've ever tried out football boots from the brand Kipsta and what you think of them. Also, if you've enjoyed the content and found this video helpful, please leave a like. It's so helpful for the channel. And also feel free to subscribe as well. We're doing a giveaway when we hit 20,000 subscribers for a new pair of boots. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.